Are you liberal? Are you moderate? Are you conservative? Are you MAGA? Are you Rhino? And I pushed back on every single label, and they were frustrated. And they said, well, then what are you? And I just paused for a minute, and it popped out like, I'm normal.
All right, so welcome back to Case Studies. I am with my friend, John Curtis, who will be our new senator in Utah, or is, on the verge of
got to get through the general election.
He made it through the generals, which I am ignorant is a strong word, but I've never been interested in politics. It's always kind of something that's far away. I've had so much in front of my face in the business world that you kind of put it off to somebody else. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've had friends that are kind of getting into that arena and are kind of educating me on why it's important to care. Mm-hmm. And that, both on a local level, on a state level, and on a national level. And as I've got into it, you start realizing, it matters a lot that there's people that actually care a lot, that are good people that have shared values that are in those seats, because they're representing you. And so we met, through a number of friends, Alex Dunn, Jeremy Andrus, Todd Peterson, and Stan Ricks, mm-hmm. and who've all just kind of been big champions of yours for a long
good
time.
Friends. Yeah, really good friends.
And I think a lot of that kind of ties back to your roots as kind of local entrepreneur, mayor of Provo as mm-hmm. of recently, and then getting into Congress and now the Senate. And so anyway, I've been wanting to chat with you for a long time, and I hope it doesn't sound too simplistic, because a lot of this stuff is just rudimentary for me. But I also think if I don't get it, a lot of people don't get it. So I think there's
guarantee you, right? Like you're in the majority. Right. I mean, there are some of us who we live and breathe this, and it's a big, everything's a big deal. But the vast majority, the way you described it is really accurate. You got your business, you have your family. Those are front and center. They take all of your time. And then there's this politics thing over here.
It'd be a big miss if we missed some of the technical, inside baseball, just because I think it's fascinating. But I also don't want to be there too long, because I think the personal matters as much to me as anything else, as far as who's the man that ultimately is representing our state, not a short period of time. It's
6 years,
6-year minimum, but senators just traditionally serve a long time. And so I think there's a lot of that too, which is, Mitt obviously was kind of this big brand, ran mm-hmm. for president, almost won president. Probably much more known about Mitt than yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely locally known and respected, and you just crushed the primary. But also, on a national scale, it's just less of a public figure.
It's very true. Yeah, and there's good and bad with that, by the way.
No, it feels kind of more good than bad. But so maybe jump it. Let's start with the personal.
Okay.
Utah is home. Has always been home. Grew up in Salt Lake
City.
Okay.
Met my wife at the junior prom, at high school junior prom.
Skyline, right?
Skyline High.
Yep, Skyline High School. And that was kind of 1970s?
Yeah, I know. It sounds like a long time ago. 1978.
Okay.
Graduated from Skyline in 1978.
Yep. And so been married to your wife for a lot of years.
We just had our 42nd wedding
crazy.
Anniversary.
That's a long time.
And I'm just telling you, as a guy who always thought I was the young one in the room, all of a sudden I'm looking back going, wow, what happened?
In America today, it's 50% divorce rate.
That's right.
And so I think even just as a starting point, how do you stay married? Real question, what have you guys done over the years? Cause you've been an entrepreneur, leader in your church, those bring just a lot of stress, outside of having a family.
So first of all, I'm blessed with an amazing wife, and that if there's a secret, pick right? That's a big thing. But I think if my wife were here, we would both tell you that you learn that marriage is, we call it a package deal. And what I mean by that is nobody's perfect, right? And so as you date and you just see the perfect side of somebody, and then you get married, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, they have this characteristic or they have that. And I probably spent too much of my married life trying to change my wife. And the day I realized she's not going to change, and that I love the package, is a good day.
Yeah.
And realizing, like, look, the package is good.
But is that the first 5 years? Is it the first 10 years? Is it year 20? You finally figured out? It
took me a long time.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest, there's still days like when I try to change her.
I was with a good buddy yesterday, that's mid-50s, been married, 30 years. And he talked to me about the last 2 years of their marriage and how they've been the best 2 years of 30. And he said, we've gone to counseling, like our kids got out of the house and we're like committed to, and you just realize like 30 years, you think, oh man, I got it figured out. It's 30 years later. But like, when was it, has it just been a process?
Yes and no. I'll just tell you, I'm blessed with, I just have never, and I don't think my wife, we've never felt like we didn't marry the right person. And that doesn't mean that we haven't had problems. That doesn't mean that we don't argue. When I hear people say we've never argued, I think I believe it, but I don't know how.
Yeah.
Right. But I think we're each other's best friend. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Like if I had to choose time to spend with anybody, it would be my wife.
Wow.
And it's not even close.
Well, what a gift from God.
Yeah. Like it's not even close. It's like I find myself all the time just wanting to spend time with her.
Wow. And
so we've got that. And then, just this realization that it's a package deal and there are things that I do that drive her. We could spend a whole hour talking about things I do that drive her crazy.
Yeah.
But she's also blessed with things that bother me, don't bother her. And so a lot of things that I do just run off her. And we're blessed to just say, like I say, we love each other's package.
Yeah. So you guys, 4 kids?
6 kids.
6 kids. 6 kids. And all out of the house now, right?
Yes and no. You go through this phase where they all go and they all come back. And just a couple of weeks ago, my daughter and her 3 children and her husband finished medical school, moved back to Utah. They're living above our garage right now.
Yeah.
And my wife, and part of it is I do travel a lot. And so my wife has always really liked when the kids come back.
Yeah.
So temporarily we've got,
but part of it is just like in 2024, like housing is expensive. Like there's like real, like macro, like the world is changing.
So you hit it on the head. So this is their family. Her husband just graduated as a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist, and they can't pick up a home in Utah County.
Yeah, it kind of blows your mind where you're just like, these are real problems that I'm seeing like in my house.
Yep. I've
got, my son-in-law that's as educated as you can get that can't buy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If he can't buy a house, who's buying them?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I had another son move back a little while ago, and he finally got into a home, but we went through that process with him. He would go look at homes, and it was the bottom of the market, which in Utah County, is $500,000.
Yeah,
it was the bottom of the market, and they were junk. And I don't know what a newly married couple does. It's a tough market.
Yeah, it's different. It's even different. You said, hey, I always felt like the young guy. I feel like the young guy. And now I'm 41. And I think back 20 years ago buying a house, and it was just different. Like I bought a house with nothing down, a ninja loan, no assets. Like I was like peak 2006, 2005.
Right before the crash.
Like,
yeah. We were loaning to everybody.
It was crazy.
Yeah. Do you have a pulse? Okay.
Like straight up a pulse. I was like, this is incredible.
So Casey, you'll appreciate this one. My wife and I were first shopping for homes. It was the early 80s. Interest rates were higher than they are now. You were paying 15%. I had a CD at a bank that paid me 15%. So we'd go out and look for homes. And I remember finding one where we could assume the loan and it was 12%. And we thought we had died and gone to heaven.
Yeah. Wow. So you guys get married, obviously have awesome family. Politics wasn't in the mix for almost like the entire time
Correct.
that kids were in the house.
Oh yeah. And if you would have told me I would have ended up in politics, I wouldn't have believed you.
And your profession was what? Like started where and transitioned to where?
Out of college, I had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bug and tried a few things, but I actually went to work for a OC Tanner up in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And amazing training. I mean, that was the one good thing about that. The leadership there and the lessons I learned were just fantastic. They moved me to Southern California, to Virginia.
Give me two things. I anytime I hear that leadership word, and specifically young person, senior leader / organization, what did they do that impacted your career?
So Mr. Tanner, who founded the company, was a philosophy professor. And he approached his business through a philosophy landscape instead of a traditional bottom line, black and white. And what they taught me is that quality matters. And it was quality was built throughout this company. And interestingly, when I left that and went and had my own company, I also learned bootstrapping matters. And the balance of spending money to have quality things and being thrifty is a hard balance. And I think my two experiences as a business owner, having worked for a company with a lot of resources and they could do whatever they wanted financially, really taught me that, okay, when do you spend money and when are you bootstrap? I think that's an important lesson.
Yeah. So excellence, quality and frugality.
Yep.
Just kind of like,
and they balance, right? I'll tell you a funny story. Mr. Tanner loved beauty. To him, that was a quintessential value.
It was kind of their company, right?
It was, yeah. And he walked in one day and it was a factory environment. And he said, hey, I think we should carpet the factory. And they love to tell the story that he had like 10 executives. And so they said, okay, let's vote on it. 10 said no. He said yes. So they carpeted the factory. And they make gold emblems. And what they found out is when the carpet was worn out, they could tear up the carpet, ship it to New York and burn it. And there was enough money of gold in the carpet to pay for new carpet. And it had been walking out on people's shoes, right? Like that was just collecting. And he inevitably would make these business decisions based on his philosophy that would not have normally been good business decisions, but turned out to be good business decisions. Wow. Like on his birthday, he would stand at the door. He had over 1,000 employees, and he would have had $100 bill to everybody on his birthday.
How cool is that?
And so when I say quality, that's kind of, does that make sense?
But also generosity.
Yes. Yeah. That's a big part, I think, of quality, though, is generosity.
Yes and no. Like you can have groups that like are just committed to the highest quality stuff
and be
not be super generous. It seems like there's like this leadership characteristic of abundance. Like if you're sitting at a doorstep passing out $100 bills, you're not scarce. Right. You're not scarce. You know what I mean? You're abundant.
Yeah, and he wanted to share. Yeah, the company had been successful, and he wanted to share.
So
and guess what?
You're seeing this at a young age.
Yeah, very young, and huge influence on me. And I took a lot of those characteristics when I came back, and we started our own business.
Yeah,
but they had to be merged with like so many entrepreneurs. We weren't sure if we were going to pay the power bill at the end of the month. We weren't sure if we were going to make payroll. And so, trying to merge those two worlds was really interesting.
No, it's amazing. So you do that, and then where'd you go from there?
So we sold the business. We designed and built shooting ranges. It was a lot of fun.
But did you go straight from OC Tanner to entrepreneur?
Yes. So when I was OC Tanner, I loved it, but you can relate to this. I had this longing inside. Yeah. Like I got to have my own thing. And
what is that window that you were there? Because I think that matters. Like I think looking back, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I was there. There's a big difference if you're there for a year.
Yeah, I was there 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years of real life.
Yes.
Chapter.
It is a chapter, and I felt like I was right on the prefaces. Had I not left, I probably would have never left.
Because you would have been senior enough that it just would have got too good.
Too good, and it was pretty darn good.
When you were there.
When I was there.
Yeah.
But I had this itch, and the only way I could scratch it was to have my own business. So
was it just calling to you? Did you just feel like, hey,
it was almost like every day, it's like, this is nice, but I want to be the boss.
Yeah.
And
how does that empathy impact the way that you lead today? Because I know, like, when you're like, you've got Utah that's an economic force, you know, like there's so many good policies and so many good things happen in Utah that promote entrepreneurship. And I think leadership matters a lot. If the leaders in place are encouraging / structuring the incentives properly to feed that, you know, how is that experience of calling to go be an entrepreneur and then experiencing it influence the way that you've led in government?
Thank you. It's huge. And I'll tell you the answer is I try to give all my employees, and when I at Action Target, I try to give them the entrepreneurial experience within my company so they don't have to leave to scratch that itch. The reality of it is Tanner could have kept me, but they wouldn't let me scratch the entrepreneurial
Go fly.
itch.
Yeah,
yes.
It was too tight.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
And so I felt like my salespeople at Action Target, I told them, this is you own this territory as it's your own business.
Yeah.
And I actually let them decide like how much their people were paid, how much profit, and they had their own little profit center.
Wow.
And so I tried to give them that.
Was that an insight from like?
It was.
Yeah,
it was
like what you had experienced.
It also, and Tanner did that to some degree, but what I realized is they then are invested at a very different level if they feel like it's theirs.
Yeah.
And so it was good. I think one of the things that happens is bosses that do that, when people flourish, sometimes they feel like, oh, you've flourished too much. I'm going to I got to cut your territory.
I mean, it's so relevant. Like when you're talking about this stuff, I go back to my career, and I was in door-to-door sales, and you think about like these unexpected doors that you go down, and you can never, you go down and it puts you on a path you never thought you would be in. But I ended up with Todd Peterson, and I would have thought max I'm there 3 to 5 years, and I was there 15 years.
Yeah.
But what he did that you're describing was we were all entrepreneurs within his business. We all felt like business owners to the extent that we actually had physical equity. We actually had like physical ownership that we could buy, and also we earned. But then you also had your own P&L.
Mm-hmm.
You could, within guardrails, and it was an extremely entrepreneurial experience, and it just captured it. It checked that creativity box and the freedom box, and it got all of me the entire time that I was there. And I think in a different structure, I wouldn't have stayed.
It's really interesting. And the other thing is, I don't know how it was for you, but it took a lot of the risk out.
I think that's one that, like, if you were lecturing young entrepreneurs, there is some benefit working within a big organization with the right culture.
Yeah.
Because I think about like the lessons and the mistakes. I mean, we made some mistakes that in any other business would have ended the business. $100 million mistakes. That the business just kind of swallows it and moves on if you're big. And also, like, you get sued or signing on leases or making payroll. I never felt that weight, and so it was the liability that later I felt as an entrepreneur and having to make payroll, and
so there's your next book, the business, the entrepreneur within the business.
No, fascinating. But that was an insight that you said, hey, this is a pain point for me at Tanner, and turned it into a reason why people loved working in your business.
Yeah. And I
was eliminating that pain or trying to.
Yeah. I would hope that, I would aspire to them saying, I love to work in that environment.
Yeah. And you think you accomplished it when you look back? Do you think you had that type of culture?
It's never perfect. And I had partners, but I think we had, people would tell you we had some magic.
Yeah.
And that magic is hard to find.
How fun is that working in a startup? Like, how fun is that building? Like, unless you've experienced it, it's tough to describe.
It's tough to describe. I remember so clearly the day I walked into my partner and say, I think we're going to hit this number, right? Like, it was a huge number to us, and I think we're going to hit this number. And that was very, very different than working for somebody else, right? And hitting your target. That's fine, right? But it's when your own business, you just added to the bottom line of that business by hitting that number.
Yeah. You're just elated. Like it brings like the highs and the lows.
Exactly.
Like you experience life different in that seat.
Yeah, because our very next conversation was probably, that's fine, but how are we going to make payroll?
Of course. So you go do that. How long did you build that business?
We did 10 years.
Sold it? So another 10 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if it's just coincidence, but 10 years kind of seems to be
that's a number. Like that's a real number.
So I think it's large enough that you really have an opportunity to explore it, but short enough that I don't get bored.
You hear this a lot from the Jack Welches and even Tony Robbins. I've heard him say it, like we highly overestimate what we can do in a year. We come into stuff with tremendous ambition and maybe some hubris and you feel this headwind that first year, but we highly underestimate what you can go do in a decade.
Right.
Just because those compounding benefits and just time.
So like at the end of a decade, there wasn't a single obstacle that I didn't know the answer to for my business.
You mastered it.
Whatever a customer came to me with as
fascinating
an obstacle, like I knew the answer.
What's another interesting concept? Have you ever read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
He kind of made famous that 10,000 hour rule.
Yes.
But a decade's kind of about 10,000 hours. It's
So for me, you're right.
But do you get bored?
So there's the problem.
Yeah.
That's why a decade, right? Because like once you know the answer to every question that you're going to be asked,
you're not growing.
It is a little. That's what's happened to me. Is in each case is okay. I need the next challenge. When I was mayor, I'd been mayor 8 years.
Yeah,
that means I had been in 8 parades.
Yeah,
I had been to 8 Easter egg chases. I had been to 8 of. Does that make sense? 8 of everything.
It just wasn't the magic. It wasn't the same magic as it was in the early years.
And I think, particularly in an elected office, you owe it to your constituents. If you're not walking in with that enthusiasm,
that energy
every day, then it's probably time to move on.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. When did you get the itch to say public service is something that I could be good at? Because I've got another friend that made a ton of money, sold his company for hundreds of millions of dollars, and stepped into the arena. This is a couple of years ago, and he just didn't have it. He got whooped, and he looked back and he's like, I thought I'd been successful in this. I'll go but he didn't have the ability to go capture the hearts and minds.
So it's a little bit probably like a business, which is if you're not stepping in with passion, then it's,
you've got to be all in.
Yeah. And the voters know that. So the election cycle I just went through, there were 2 self-funders and they didn't really do extremely well. When I ran for mayor, I was mad at the mayor because of the way he had treated my business.
Really? You just made it hard on you.
He like, for instance, we had a ribbon cutting in town. We built a beautiful building in town. He wouldn't come to it.
What?
And he was very spiteful and was very hard on our business. So when
was it the nature of your business? Just didn't like the nature of your business? Didn't like you? Like what was
I think the crux of it was that we were a manufacturing business. The zoning that Provo had laid out put us next to a neighborhood. He lived in that neighborhood, and
interesting.
When trucks came down the road, they would call him. When we made too much noise, they would call him.
He just resented it, kind of said, even though
we were a problem.
Yeah.
We were a problem. And so when we sold the business, I was looking around and kind of pushed on some doors. They didn't open. And I said, you know what? I'm going to run. We can do better as a city. I'm going to run for mayor. And I just knew we could do better. And so I ran with that passion. And I think that's what made a difference.
So fun listening to your story because you see these themes of like, they're entrepreneurial themes. Even you getting into politics is this theme of pain. How do I alleviate the pain or, problem? Yeah. How do I fix the problem? Yep. Yeah. Which, took you from corporate career to entrepreneurship and then from entrepreneurship to a step removed. But it's kind of the same thing, which is like, how do I help entrepreneurs? Like, especially at that local level.
And I'm just telling you, what was so rewarding about being mayor is that we plugged into this entrepreneurial spirit in Provo and rewarded it instead of punishing it.
And you were kind of there. I mean, there's been waves. You take kind of those early juggernauts, the word perfects
Yep.
and, that kind of came through and paved the way. And then you kind of have this next generation, the Qualtrics and the Vivants and the Omnitures and the, Domos and the different groups that and you were kind of right in the middle of that Silicon Slopes.
Can you imagine what fun for me?
That was so fun.
So, for instance, when Qualtrics early on invited me to one of the ribbon cuttings, and they were a tiny little company, and they were so excited for this ribbon cutting. And Ryan Smith looked at me in the eye and said, "We're going to be big one day." And I'd attended so many ribbon cuttings that I tended to kind of roll my eyes, right, and say, "Everybody tells me that." But can you imagine? I got a front row seat to watch them go from that ribbon cutting to eventually the company that they've become today. And I just felt like, wow, I'm on a front row seat for this.
So you're there with Qualtrics, you're there with Ryan Smith. And I think everybody who looks at Ryan Smith now, I think that if I've learned anything about success, is everybody looks at kind of the end result and they just think linear path.
Yeah.
So it was always easy for that person,
yeah.
And there was no friction. But you were there in those early days where these young, scrappy are like fighting for resources and fighting for, anything to go like make it easier to go succeed and go compete on a national level. That had to have been like, that's got to be something you're like the most proud of.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what fueled me was the energy that you could feel from these entrepreneurs. And there's nothing more exciting to me than walking into a room full of entrepreneurs because you can feel that energy. And Provo, as you know, just everywhere you looked was that energy that was coming from these entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's got to be like the thing that you're the most proud of, or one of the things. Obviously, you're doing a lot of different things, but just I think business in general, it really does fuel everything. I mean, people think business, but business is somebody's job. It's their rent payment. It's their career development. And like, if you have a thriving business community, you're going to have a thriving community. It just translates.
So I think that's what was so fun is we went from an environment where businesses were almost run out of town to Provo being known as one of the best places to start a business
in the country. Yeah, in the country.
And I remember, this is kind of funny, and it'll tell you where my head was at, but I was watching the national news one day, and they were showing the weather around the country. And they put up a map, and when they showed the West, instead of Salt Lake, they had Provo on there. And I just knew that Provo had arrived.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
No, of course.
Nobody else would have paid any attention to that.
You go back in the history of the state, and that it's got to be like the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
But kind of a shifting, you take the two now, and even with all like the growth studies, like Utah County will be as big or bigger than Salt Lake County.
It will be. And the business community here, the entrepreneurial community here is known worldwide. I hear about Silicon Slopes no matter where I go in the country.
Yeah.
And it's really very cool.
So you do that. And again, almost another decade, 8 years of, so you kind of almost have like these 3 chapters. You've got kind of the corporate learning, growing, developing, build your own business chapter, and then like pouring it into the community. Mm-hmm. And at that point, like when you started in Provo, did you have any idea that, hey, this could be bigger than being a local mayor? Like when was it that you started seeing like, hey, I could grow in this like I grew in my business? And like
I never saw that, as a matter of fact, even till today. In many ways, I look at the mayor as the pinnacle of my political career.
Yeah.
Because it was just such a good experience. Everybody in the city had a good experience. The city prospered. I had a good experience. And I tell people all the time I miss those days.
We moved from Logan. I moved from Logan. My wife's from Houston. Came down after a church mission and just never left. Yeah. And there was no reason to leave. And it was because there was just so much happening.
What year did you come?
It was 2004.
Yeah.
But there was just a lot happening. Like it was so fun.
Yeah. It's just a vibe. It's almost in the air.
But
right?
the universities, I had Astrid on here, and, UVU, it's just exploding. And then you've got BYU, that's this national brand or international brand that just attracts youth and talent.
And then add on to that the quality of life with the recreation,
the mountains,
everything.
Climate. Yeah. So you go have like this really exceptional experience. When was it that you said, I'm going to transition to the next challenge or the next kind of peak of the mountain?
So this is kind of the funny part of the story is I was bound and determined to get out of politics.
You wanted out.
I wanted out.
But what do you want to go do?
Well, so what's interesting, you mentioned those 3 chapters. Not one of those did I know what it was when I started down the path.
You didn't even know you were starting that path.
They came to me. Does that make sense? And I was just convinced that the next thing would come to me. And it would present itself.
You've got to think that you had to have thought at that point, like maybe get back into business because it's so almost like irresistible. You know?
So let me take everything I've learned. Let me take all those relationships. Yes, and that's where I was headed. And I told people that I would never run for Congress. I'd been back to Washington. I saw what it was. I didn't want to do that. And some of your listeners will know a guy by the name of Owen Fuller. And Owen's an entrepreneur, and he kept trying to talk me into running for Congress. He put up a GoFundMe page to raise money, and I sent him an email and I said, "There's a 0.0000000% chance I would ever do that." And he and I laugh about that all the time now. But I would say it somewhat called to me too, and I felt like it was something I needed to do.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how different it would be from being mayor. I thought, okay, it's an elected position. It's going to be a lot like mayor. The things that I used to be successful as mayor will apply. And I quickly learned that it's just a totally different environment.
So give me like a little history lesson of like how it all works, you know, like, and I don't want to sound too rudimentary, but like if I don't fully grasp this, I know other people don't.
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about going into Congress and what is the House and what is the Senate and how do they work?
Yeah. So, and I think you're right. I think we sometimes make assumptions that everybody got this right, and they don't. So in short, the United States House of Representatives has 435 representatives. They're proportioned by population. So at a real rough number, around 750,000 people get one representative. So Utah, with 3.5 million people, we have 4 representatives. Yeah. And so some states have a large number, some states have 1. Every state has a minimum of 1, no matter what their population is. And so as I went into that body, I was one of 435. The Senate is very different. The Senate is based 2 per state. So regardless of the size of your state, you all have 2. So Utah has the same representation in the Senate as California.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of reasons why the Senate's a more powerful position. That's one, is that we carry the same votes as California, as New York, as Texas, in Utah. Also, because there's 100 instead of 435, just naturally, your opinion is more important. And then third, the rules of the Senate favor an individual. And so there was not really a time in my 7 years in Congress where as one of 435 that my vote really would have tipped something one way or the other. But in the Senate, that happens all the time.
Where it matters.
Every vote.
You see that every single year, you know, from an outside looking in. And right now it's basically 50-50.
Yep. And
so people that would kind of fall more towards the middle, they affiliate with one party or another party, but they're pretty independent. They're kind of like, I'm going to go my own route. They end up becoming very important.
Yeah. So Joe Manchin is a really good example of that. I don't think anybody in the United States had heard of Joe Manchin several years ago. Now everybody knows who he is because he became that swing vote, and Democrats were in charge, and he's a Democrat. So him not going along with the Democrats meant they couldn't pass their bill.
Yeah, and it mattered.
It mattered a lot, and he became very, very influential in politics because of that.
Yeah, I can't imagine how much pressure those people are under.
So it's
like good and bad pressure.
It's like good and bad, and I think what most people don't realize is when we take a vote, it's not a black and white thing. It's probably like a business owner sitting down and making a decision. Okay, I'm weighing all of these factors. There's some good, there's some bad. I'm going this way. And a vote's similar. It's not a black. You weigh all the factors. There's some good, there's some bad. Okay, I'm going this way.
Yep.
And most of your constituents back home, they pick up on the bad or they pick up on the good, and they didn't like your vote because of these elements and didn't really go through that process that you went through.
Yeah. So you've got kind of the house that you were in the house for
7 years.
Yeah, another almost,
close
to a decade.
Won't surprise you. I was getting close to being done.
Yeah. And like, talk to me about what you're proud of in those 7 years, and talk to me about what was frustrating. What were the times where you go home and you're just kind of bummed, and the other times where you like, I did something good?
Yeah. So I would say on the good side, we've been able to pass 20 pieces of legislation, which is very unusual. Some of those are very consequential. For instance, in Utah, we deal with this problem of public lands. We have people from the east who want to tell us what we can do, where we can recreate, where we can't recreate, and it causes a lot of conflict. We were able to take 1.3 million acres and find resolution between all the groups that normally don't get along, and actually get consensus on how we would use the land, where we would protect, where we would recreate, where we would graze. And that's always, I think me and my team are always going to be very, very proud of that. I think the frustration comes in that you go in as 10435, and how do you distinguish yourself? And it's just really hard to differentiate yourself and feel like, I'm making a difference here.
Outside of just like being a jackass. Like there's
that's
also
right.
there's also
that's how
like
some people differentiate themselves.
Kind of theater and just like be as outrageous as you can be to get some attention, and you see that. And I think that's the part of politics that just turns me off. I see it and I'm like, who are these clowns that we elected? You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. And I think that's the result of, okay, I'm 435. How am I going to differentiate myself?
Yeah.
I'm going to go say something outrageous, and I'll end up on the news that night, and I'll go home and I'll raise a lot of money based on that. And sadly, that's what most of America sees.
Yeah.
And the people who just go to work and pass legislation, that doesn't end up on the news.
You told me in private, we were really proud to help you raise some money for your candidacy and got behind you. And we had a group of donors, and you were telling everybody, and I thought this was really insightful. You were talking about kind of the good and the good on both sides.
Right.
And how like good people, maybe they don't see the world the same, but they got the same intention, which is make things and actually like good stuff that you guys got done. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that's the stuff you don't see, on the news.
So I think what surprises most people is that they see the few on the fringes and they assume everybody's like that. And the reality of it is there's hundreds of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, who actually like each other, who wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to get something done for my country today. And they'll sit down and they'll find somebody who maybe sees things differently than they do, but they'll work through and find that common place where their values do across, and then pass legislation based on that. And that happens all day long, every day. And that's what's unfortunate, is the American people don't get to see that.
Because that's how life works. That's how business works. That's how family works. Is like, you're not going to see things the same, but you got to go find common ground and shared values, and you got to go like work with where you can work to try to move it along. And I think that was insightful for you to kind of say, most of the time that's what's happening.
It's exactly right. And the sad thing is it's not sexy. So you don't see it on social media. You don't see it on cable news because it doesn't get clicked through.
Yeah. So talk to me about kind of your political journey, because I think there's been times where I think I was reading in a Wikipedia that at one point in life you'd said, hey, I am a Democrat.
Yeah. Wow. We need another hour for that.
Yeah. But talk to me about that, kind of that journey of like, obviously like what I'm hearing, you living in Utah, is that you were probably more open. You probably would have been like a Republican in California.
Well, so I grew up a Republican. And I think, I tend to, instead of say Republican values, I like to say Utah values. So I grew up with Utah values, and quickly that's, hard work, independence, the things that I think made our country great, or what I affiliate with. And I mentioned with the O.C. Tanner Company, they moved me around the country, and I spent 10 years outside of Utah.
Yep.
And when I came back to Utah, I was really frustrated by the Republican Party. This was about 2000. It was so dominant and everything was so Republican that there was no competition and there was no accountability. So when your elected leaders are just automatically put back in, there is no accountability.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a mistake. And I felt like that how do we introduce accountability into this? Well, you introduce competition. And you know, all of us in business would love to have no competition, but we're always at our best. The better the competition is,
of course,
we're at our best.
Yep.
And so that was my idea: is, the Republican Party needs competition. So I changed the Utah County Democratic platform, put in those values that I just mentioned that I think are Utah values.
Yeah. And
I ran as a Democrat so that when people went to the polls, they would actually have a choice between two people who they felt represented their values. Well, I failed miserably. It was the startup that was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because people weren't really willing to separate the national democratic issues from the local ones.
Yeah.
And I couldn't disassociate myself from those.
Yeah. And you think that was just being naive?
Me?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just kind of like rolling into it with some fresh eyes saying,
yep.
Yeah, they need two choices versus like.
And I look back in hindsight, there was no chance that was going to be successful. But I do think, people who understand what I did actually really appreciate it.
No, I'm sitting here listening to it being like, I'd love to have like two good options.
Two options, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like regardless of what they're called, I'd love to have like two good options.
And, I think truthfully, it hurt my political career. Like you wouldn't say, okay, I want a career in politics, I'm going to run as a Democrat in Utah County, right? Like that's not how you would start out. But I've been able to overcome it.
But what's funny is like it hasn't hurt you.
No.
Like there's never, I don't know if you've ever lost anything you ran for, have you?
I ran that race where I ran as a Democrat, but everything else I've been successful at.
Yeah, kind of been successful. But this last one, you just kind of stomped it.
I did.
Shouldn't have been as efficient as it was. You think about that Senate race.
Yeah.
Yeah, it surprises me that as kind of a new entrant to this, and obviously you were in, the House, but like
we did well.
And I think it's like a nod to you. Obviously it's your team, but also to you. We should have known each other a long time before we knew each other.
Yeah, we should.
But I knew enough people who knew you that it was very easy to get behind you. Like it was 1, 2, 3 calls. And again, I'm in Utah County and, Provo was where you live, but it was 1, 2, 3 calls. It's like, oh yeah, like this is an easy one to get behind.
Somebody came up to me 2 days ago and they said, I've never met you, but I feel like I know you. And I consider that the world's greatest compliment. And if I can get to a point where people feel like they know me, that to me is nirvana for a politician.
There was a guy that really outstanding individual. Just did a podcast with him. Business owner out of Vegas, really successful outcome, in the community for a long time, sold his company. And I'd never met him before, but I'd had 2, 3, 4 people that had told me, hey, you got to meet this guy. He'd be a great, he should be investing with you guys. And I'd never met him. And I meet him, and the first words that came out of my mouth was like, your reputation precedes you. Like, I've had 3 people that told me, and I kind of have that same feeling with you where you've done a good enough job in life. And again, it's probably the ultimate compliment that the reputation has preceded you. Like if you're in the same town, in the same city, in the same house with the same cell phone, 20, 30, 40 years later, you're probably doing it the right way. You're not running away from a mess that you made.
I take that as a great compliment, and I'll smile a little bit because my one weakness is we have moved our homes way too many times within Provo. It's all been within Provo.
Yep.
But now we're in a home, and my wife and I have sworn it's our last home.
I love it. So talk to me about the Senate.
Yep.
Transition from the House to the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Big
transition.
Yeah, big transition, arguably with like, this is as big as it gets for Utah, outside of, the governor runs the state, but like this, you're one of two that are representing the state, and one of 100 in the greatest nation in the world, like the most.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
It's pinch me type stuff. It really is surreal. And I never want to wake up and take that for granted. And I like every day it's like, wow, is this really happening to me?
Yeah. So talk to me about the state of the union, the state of politics, our country, and kind of what fires you up to lead in kind of in the years to come. You got 6 years if you get into that seat. Like, what impact gets you excited to go lead?
So the state of the country is very confusing. A lot of people feel lost, and it's divisive. And that's not the politics I grew up in. It's not the country I grew up in, and it's not where I want this country to be. And I talk to people every day, and it seems like regardless of their political stripes, people are unrest with where we're at. And it's not just as a country. You look internationally, the wars and things that are going on it's just it's a place that a lot of people would like to be able to figure out how to move out of and get to more peace and prosperity and unity, quite frankly. And so what I aspire to going to the Senate is to be a change agent, to bring some of that stability, that unity. And that doesn't mean we all get along. It doesn't mean we all have the same opinion. It just simply means that there's a common cause for our country that is greater than us individually, and that we're unified in advancing our country to peace and prosperity. I was recently interviewed, and it was the day after the election, and the newspaper was trying to pin me down as to how do I stereotype you? Yeah. Are you liberal? Are you moderate? Are you conservative? Are you MAGA? Are you rhino? And I pushed back on every single label, and they were frustrated, and they said, well, then what are you? And I just paused for a minute, and it popped out like, I'm normal. And that was so foreign that it's so foreign, but it like resonates with me. Like that's where I fall. Like when I look at like all of the stuff, I'm like, I'm none of those things. Like, I think that's what turns me off is the extremes. But I like common sense and like moving forward and being productive and contributing makes a ton of sense to me. And I think that ultimately was the reason why we hit it off so well. Was you are normal. You're like, I'd say most of us, we just want it to be better, with less drama, like turn down and maybe that the world we live in, that'll never happen, with the media and there's kind of machinery that forces that stuff to the limelight. Yeah. And I'm not ready to give up and say it'll never happen, but I do worry, but I'm like you, I do worry. About it. Talk to me. So this is one that I'm intrigued with and I've got opinions on, but talk to me about faith. Talk to me about how faith is factored. I know, it's important to you, your faith, and has kind of dictated a lot of your decisions through life, but talk to me about how that's factored both personally, in your marriage, in your business, and ultimately now like in politics. Fundamental. Foundational, and in everything, in every decision, and particularly decisions that are life changing and life altering. Am I going to run for Senate? Am I going to, who will I marry, and those types of things. And I can't tell you for me in my life how helpful it has been to be faith based, to feel like there's a greater purpose, to feel like there is somebody orchestrating everything. And that doesn't mean every decision I make has to be, like exactly what God would have me do. But overall, that I'm living my life in harmony with what He would have me do is everything to me, and is very instrumental. A couple of times we've said, well, I didn't plan on doing that, or this came to me. And I really believe throughout my life, if I've lived the life that I'm supposed to be living, those things present themselves to me. And have you always just kind of trusted? Yeah, always. Like when something pops up, have you always just kind of trusted, hey, life is happening for me? Yeah, and it's this is part of a bigger plan. Word. I can feel it. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's not like I'm out there on trust. It's like fascinating. Of course, this is right. You can just feel it in your heart. I feel it, and that's why these decisions ultimately have gone against what I originally said I was going to do. Yeah, the Senate decision. People, I was in, I was out, I was in, I was out, and ultimately I couldn't stay out because it presented itself to me. Yeah.
You felt like you were called to it.
Yeah. And I'm always careful with that because I don't want to imply that I'm the one that God wanted to do this.
No, and I think there's a difference between like literally feeling it in my heart, like this is right for me.
Yeah.
And if it's right for everybody else, we'll let people decide, but it's right for me. And
that's a good way to work.
Yeah. Like I feel like it's bringing me in.
And I also believe I think God could want me to run and not necessarily to win.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what am I going to learn from running?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people misinterpret that and say, God said I'm going to win this. And whenever I hear that, like, it's that I don't like that. But I think we all, at least I try to follow what he wants me to do. And then you figure out where that's going to take you.
Give me a couple pieces of advice on what you tell young entrepreneurs.
Yeah. If I had to do it over again, I would take more risk sooner. And I think this, you're on this continuum where the risk is not expensive when you're 20 years old and don't have children and don't have a mortgage. But that risk gets more and more expensive as you have children, as you have a spouse, as you have obligations. And there were some inflection points early on in my career where I didn't take the risk that I look back and I will always say, what if? Does that make sense?
You could have jumped. You could have gone for something. Maybe you had the idea.
I had an idea, and
was it fear?
It was comfort.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It was.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I think both are scary.
Yeah.
Being too comfortable is scary.
Yeah. But I think people, when you're in those early years, you may not realize that this is easier and less scary than later on when you have 6 kids, a mortgage, and people dependent on you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's really like calculating like that there's risk to not do it. Because I think we always assume that there's not risk in staying on the same track, and there's risk for trying something new. And your advice would be,
you don't want to be my age and look back and say, what if
I had more music to play? Which honestly, like I want to recognize that you've obviously implemented that since. Because running for Senate, you're running for Congress,
that's risk.
Running for mayor, you're getting in the arena.
Yeah. I don't have a single regret, but I have some what ifs.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Of course.
And probably the biggest are tied to risk I didn't take at a point in life where I could have totally failed and it would have been fine.
Yeah. Awesome. What advice would you give to somebody considering getting into politics? Because I think they're too.
Yeah. So that's really hard. I don't advise, I don't advise my kids not to do it, but I certainly haven't encouraged them to do it. My advice is it has to be right. You cannot force this. And it's the same thing. Like if you're going to just go start entrepreneurial, it's going to be hard, right? Like if you're not ready for hard, don't do this. If you're not ready to have millions of dollars spent in a TV market saying you're a bad person, don't do this because that's going to happen.
How humbling is that? Like, talk to me about that experience of, that's just the nature of the beast, and the higher that you get, the more dollars that go into it. But like literally doing whatever they can to frame you in the worst light possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually think, before when I said like, God may want you to run, even though it doesn't win, I think that some of me running was to humble me. When I was mayor, I was on the top of the world.
Just flying under the radar a little bit.
Yeah. And I thought I was pretty, hot stuff. And then you run for office and the world comes in and your walls come in and millions of dollars are spent on TV saying you're a schmuck.
Yeah.
And it humbles you real quick.
Oh, so interesting. Well, I appreciate you coming and spending time with me. I think as we wrap, if you were to go back and you were to do it all over again, with the same knowledge that you have now, what would you do different? Like what adjustments would you make?
So I have a characteristic that my wife and I kind of joke about of things bother me. So we went on a camp out trip. This is the best example. And we were at a lake and I set up the tent and sand in the tent bothers me. So I went and found these rocks, and I built this from the lake to the tent, these rocks, so the kids could get from the lake into the tent without bringing sand into the tent. My wife spent the afternoon playing with the kids. And if I had to do it all over again, I would spend the afternoon playing with the kids instead of worrying about sand in the tent.
Yeah.
And this is my wife's like just huge,
just a
gift that things don't bother her. And she spends time playing with the kids while I'm out doing stuff that, at the end of the day, who cares if there's sand in the tent? And
that's so profound.
My wife jokes with me that I'm better than most. And that came from that camp out trip where she gave me a little bit of lecture about, you picked the wrong thing here. You should have spent time with the kids.
I think about that parable of Christ, and he's got kind of the two Marys, and
what matters most.
One of them's worrying about what's happening in the house, and one of them's just being present, and kind of that lesson of like you got to pick the stuff that matters. And you're going back to that core stuff that all of us are feeling. When I think about guilt that I have, sometimes it's working too much and just saying like what I need to do isn't work more hours. It's to turn off my phone and go be with my family.
Sometimes work is the easy thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's instant, and you get this feedback, and it kind of a rush.
And
I'm good at it, and I can control it. Where the other one,
it's hard.
It's harder, and it's a labor of love, and it's going to go take this emotional energy. I had one more thought before we finish up. Talk to me about leaders, specific leaders in your life that shape the course of your life. Yeah. Who were they and what did they do? You talked about O.C. Tanner, but who else were the kind of the core people in your life that maybe believed in you more?
So I would say there are a couple people that believed in me and gave me a chance when every practical thing said, you should not give this guy a chance. He doesn't have the experience. He doesn't have anything like that. So one was a very, very early job where I was too young to even rent a car. And they gave me a territory for citizen watches, and I covered 6 states. And a guy by the name of Jack Zemer took a chance on me and hired me. And then another's an ecclesiastical thing where I had no business doing what I was asked to do.
Talk to me about specifics, because this one Jack, was it was it the responsibility
he saw something in me I didn't see in myself?
Saw that you were a leader.
He saw something that I didn't see myself, and was willing to overlook my lack of experience, my all of the things because he saw something in me.
Yep.
And then that pulled that out of me. Does that make sense?
Of course. And the ecclesiastical leader, was it a mission? Was it was it a time where?
So I was 20-something years old, and they put me on a high council in California.
Wow. So early.
Yeah. Like I had no business. I didn't have the experience or anything like that. And it turned out to be life-altering for a number of reasons. One was that stake president had a serious accident, and I got to observe him close up, go through that, and so inspirational. And I was surrounded by these other people I had so much respect for, and just learning and growing from that experience really shaped me.
And how do you pay that forward?
Yeah. That's a good question. I hope that I do the same thing with others and see in them what they don't see in themselves. I hope I do that. I think that I'm always wondering if I'm really doing that, or if I'm expecting too much of somebody before I'm giving them an opportunity.
John, I've loved chatting with you. Excited to see what you go do over the next 6 years, and just want to tell you congrats on winning. That's hard to do. And also just let you know that it's been fun, for me that I'm not in politics, to be able to see somebody that, now I consider a friend, go through the ups and the downs. There was a point where it was like, hey, we've got a group that's coming in that's going to go spend millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all these negative ads are popping up all over. And I'm like, and I'm watching this. And before, I'm just like, I wouldn't have even noticed it. Yeah. But when you start realizing like that there's just forces at work and you're in the arena, and to know that there's good people that are in the arena, you know, that are in there for the right reasons, pumps me up, and I'm pulling for you and excited to see what you go do.
Thanks, Casey. This has been fun. You're good at this.
No, thank you.
I usually like talking about myself, but you've really made me like talking about myself.
Oh, thank you.
So it's been fun. Thank you for including me. And I look forward to being part of that political journey for you.